I take the opportunity to welcome everyone here, and this is really Baruch Hashem, really special for us because although we've had past legal holiday programs, Baruch Hashem is the first time we have the opportunity to get people together to learn Bechavrusa, and it's really very special. And I really want to give a very special akaras to Rabbi Motzen for agreeing to come and to give us a share this morning. Rabbi Motzen is one of the incredible powerhouses in our community, and often in his quiet and humble way, people don't realize the dramatic impact that he is having on Klal Yisrael, not just in our community, but Baruch Hashem, really beyond. And Motzen and I had these chus, Baruch Hashem, to travel together. I had this chus to be invited on the OU mission together. Jeremy's here, right? Jeremy and I went, Baruch Hashem, and we had a wonderful Baltimore contingent. And one of the goals, one of the objectives of that trip was to be able to connect with individuals who had suffered really staggering loss, in an effort to just be mechazik, not per se a financial relationship, not anything more than just a relationship for the sake of having a relationship. We're all one people, we're all one entity, and the truth is when one of us is hurting, the rest of us feel that pain. And so one of the people that we were zocha to meet on the first day of the trip was a young woman, Hodaya Harush, whose husband, a Master Sergeant Harush, was murdered in a firefight in the police station in Sderot, one of the earliest casualties of this war. And they say that his heroic actions literally saved thousands of people. So Rabbi Motzen and I together, us and our collective Kehilos, really decided to adopt the Harush family as someone who we would try to figure out what we could do. So we've dedicated Maseches Baba Kama, Emir Hashem, in the memory of this holy police officer, this holy Jew who has literally died al Kiddush Hashem. And so today is an extension of that. Our family is going to Emir Hashem Teretz for Hanukkah. We hope to be able to bring things for the Harush family and to be able to spend some time together with them. And this young woman, this Hodea Harush, is, I spoke about her on Shabbos. I'm sure Rabbi Motzen spoke about her in his Kila as well. We met her totally by accident. We were standing right opposite the site of the now demolished police station. Remember, again, this is where the terrorists were holed up, and the IDF came in and they just bulldozed. They're Americans going to rebuild the police station, but they bulldozed the entire area. We're standing there with our group, like overwhelmed at the destruction, overwhelmed just at the bloodshed that took place in this. It's literally Atmas Kodesh, and this young woman in a police uniform with a film crew, right, is there, and I think it was Rabbi Motzen, and I think went over to her and said, could we ask, what are you doing? And it turned out that this is the widow of Master Sergeant Michal Harush, and she was there to see the site where her husband died al Kiddush Hashem. She had just gotten up from Shiva a little while earlier, and she came to revisit the site. And the confluence of events that we happened to be there meeting this woman. She spoke to our group, and her words were just overwhelming. But more than anything she could say, what was overwhelming was, they say, the dugma ishit, the person she is. This young woman, I don't know, is she in her upper 20s? Maybe. This young woman, in her quiet and unassuming way, represented the best of Klal Yisrael. An unshakable commitment to the people, to the land, to the nation, resiliency, hope, optimism, and it was incredible. It was overwhelming, and I think all of us, we're standing there. I know I felt so small in this woman's presence. You are one of the Giborei Yisrael. And so, we're always, all of us are trying to figure out what we can do and how we can help and how we could participate, and we're all engaged in so many different things. But a program like this that is really just focused on perpetuating the memory and the legacy of one. We talk about thousands. We talk about 1,400. We talk about thousands. We talk about 240. Rabbi Motzen said this at the rally, and in the Baltimore rally in Penn Station. It was very profound. Sometimes numbers are important because they convey the scope and the enormity, but sometimes you lose yourself a little bit in numbers. Sometimes kind of the way to focus yourself and refocus on what's happening now for Klal Yisrael is not to focus on multitudes, but to focus on one. And it's heartbreaking when you think about a young man who died al Kiddush Hashem in his prime, leaving behind a widow, leaving behind 3 young daughters. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to think about children who grow up. There's no question that they will hear the stories of their father, but they will never be zocha to go through any of their life milestones with their father. It's enormous. It's one story in a sea of tragic stories. But we as Am Yisrael never lose ourselves in the tragedy, but rather we always try to figure out what we can do. It's something like this together, getting together, learning together, taking a day where you could just as easily sleep a little bit later, watch a little bit more football. Although, please, don't spend more than an hour in the football piece. It's just, people tell me they watch my shir at 1.5 speed. If you could watch Daf Yomi at 1.5 speed, then football should be at least on 2.5. Or just get the score at the end. I don't understand. You could skip the whole thing, skip the suspense, and just get the end. But Lamaisa, again, a tremendous hashikoch to all of you. Really a tremendous hashikoch to Rabbi Motzen. We hope to be able to kind of do more. Really, our two shuls have really taken on this special neshama, this special family. So we hope to be able to do more, both in the realm of learning, as well as in other forms of support that we could offer to this precious family going forward. And again, I want to give a very special thank you to Saeed Haken. The breakfast this morning is sponsored by the Haken and Silber families in honor of all of you, in honor of Rabbi Motzen leaving his kihil and coming here to learn with us. And with that, my pleasure to ask Rabbi Motzen to share with us some words of Torah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I just thank you for that introduction. I just want to add one last piece about that encounter that we had with this woman, with Hodaya. We asked her, we were dumbfounded when she shared a little bit about her husband. Her husband was a person who was exceptional at Achanasas Orchim, was, again, a policeman who risked his life daily, but over here, someone who saved countless lives. And this was one of the first people we met. This was the first morning of the trip, and we didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to say. And so one person said, what was his favorite song? That was like the only thing we could think of. And her response was, there's a song called Torah HaKadoshah. The song about the beauty of the Torah and asking Hashem to give us a connection to the Torah, to allow us to understand the Torah. That was his song. And that tells you something about who this person is. Someone who was so, despite, I'm sure, being a policeman in Sderot, this life, a busy life with young children, but his connection to Torah was paramount in his life. And so this is the most appropriate way to be able to bring an aliyah to his neshama. In general, Talmud Torah always is something important to do, but certainly for someone who felt such a close connection to Talmud Torah, to the study of Torah, for us to be learning in his memory is certainly a very appropriate thing. I want to thank Rabbi Silber for inviting me to speak here, and not only for inviting me to speak here. The truth is, after we met her, Rabbi Silber turned to me. We were all supposed to adopt different families. Rabbi Silber said, we're adopting this family. And then at the end of the week, after meeting a whole bunch of people, I just couldn't stop thinking of this Maimon, this incredible person. And I went to Rabbi Silber kind of sheepishly, and I was like, I know we're supposed to all adopt our own people, but do you mind if we partner? Which wasn't really fair. That wasn't really the rules, but Rabbi Silber, being Rabbi Silber and being as gracious as he is, was so kind in allowing me to do so. I will not say anything more about Rabbi Silber. Many of you have seen a post that I posted, a Rabbi Silber appreciation post, and I'm told by Rabbi Silber if I say anything more, he will no longer talk to me, and I don't want that to happen. But one thing I cannot skip saying, and that is that my family has a lot of very warm memories in the shul. My grandfather was the chazan before some of you remember him, here many, many years ago, and he was retired already when Rabbi Silber joined the shul, and the kavod and the care that Rabbi Silber gave to him was truly, truly remarkable, exceptional. It made my grandfather feel so incredibly important, and the entire family has such a karas tov to you, Rabbi Silber, for that and for everything that you do. Okay, so we are going to learn one sugya in Bava Kama. It's really just a few lines. I hope many of you remember this. It's just a few blot ago from Daf Test. We're actually going to skip to source number 2 and go through the sugya of Hidur Mitzvah. Okay, Hidur Mitzvah means beautifying a mitzvah. But we'll see it's not such a simple and straightforward discussion about how exactly we are meant to beautify this mitzvah. Okay, so let's learn the Gemara together. And it was beautiful. Kol Torah. I actually feel bad teaching right now because it was so beautiful to hear. The Chavrusa learning in this room was beautiful. And so hopefully we'll be able to, I don't want to be, this should not be a monologue. We're going to learn together. We'll learn this together. I'd be curious to hear what insights you were able to pull out as you started to learn this. So the Gemara in Bava Kama in source number 2 says, Amar Rav Zera behidur mitzvah ad shlish b'mitzvah. Rav Zera says that when it comes to Hidur Mitzvah, and I have over here the Jastro, for those of you who remember that big fat blue book, yeah? Okay, anyway. So basically Hidur Mitzvah means paying respect, honoring, adorning, and we'll come back. The translation is actually not so simple, but the idea is beautifying the mitzvah in some way up to a third of the mitzvah. That is the conclusion of the Gemara. If you recall, the Gemara started with an even more cryptic statement, and the Gemara ultimately concluded that the third that the Gemara was talking about, Rav Zera was talking about, or that the Gemara was talking about, was specifically up to a third of Hidur Mitzvah. Okay? So what does this mean? What is the third all about? So if you look, this is a machlokes, this is a debate between Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi, in source number 3, says, Shemotze beis sifrei toros, liknos, a person sees 2 possible Sefer Torahs to buy. Okay? obviously a person of means. They're choosing between two Sifrei Torah. They're not cheap to begin with. Ve'echad Hidur mechavero. And one of them is more Hidur, we'll say more beautiful than the next. Yosef shlish hadamim v'yikach es hahadur. A person is obligated to not buy the cheaper one, but a person is obligated to spend up to a third more of the cost of the cheaper one to buy the more beautiful one. That's how Rashi understands Hidur Mitzvah, right? So forget a Sefer Torah for a second. Let's say it's almost Hanukkah, you're about to go and buy a menorah, and there are two menorahs in the store. One menorah costs, $9, and one menorah costs $12. You'd be obligated to go ahead and buy the $12 menorah. It's pretty cheap for a menorah. Okay, but whatever, $90 and $120, right? So you'd be obligated to spend an extra third in order to buy the more beautiful menorah, right? That's what Rashi seems to be saying. However, it's not so simple. Tosfos has a different approach. Tosfos says a very different way of understanding this. Tosfos in source number 4 says, and there's also the Tosfos here in Bava Kama, Shematza esrog ke'egos. Let's say a person finds an esrog that is the smallest possible size. Now I want to mention, we'll come back to this, you will not find such an esrog in Baltimore or probably almost anywhere. I remember seeing a video a little while ago of Nafta Greenblatt, Zatzal, the great posek who lived in Memphis, and he was going through a whole bunch of lulavim and esrogim. And they were showing him esrog after esrog. And he was saying, kasher, 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 kasher. If you knew him, he was a very relaxed and but brilliant Talmud Chacham, but had a very casual way about him. And he was saying, kasher, kasher, and he was surrounded by these bachrim, and they were hakim, like, is this okay, is that okay? He stopped them at one point. He said, in Europe, if they would have seen the worst esrog you've ever seen in your life, they would have lost their mind. It would be unbelievable to see an esrog like the chinuch esrogs that we have right now. They're God's fine. They're for the most part. Ask your Rav before you buy one. Don't get me wrong, but the point is, our esrogim are great. You will not see. Have you ever seen an esrog this big? No. That's what it looks like if it shrivels up after a year of sitting in the box, right? But the point is, those esrogim existed. Tosfos says you find that small, tiny esrog that is just barely kosher. According to the measurement of our sages, ve'echad gadol mimenu shlish, and one of them is a third larger, right? Tosfos is talking about size. One of them is a third larger. Yiknehu, you should buy the larger one, right? So Tosfos is not focusing on cost. Tosfos is focusing on one is just barely kosher, so go ahead and buy the one that is a third more kosher. Right, and this would be true for probably other shiurim. Let's say, perhaps, if you have, let's say a cup of Kiddush wine, right? So do you want to buy the shiur that's just the revius, or do you want to get a kos that is a little bit larger? So that would be perhaps more mehudar. That might be a similar example that might be a little bit more relevant to all of us. Okay, so the simple distinction between Tosfos and let me actually pause. I heard everyone learning. How did you understand the difference between Tosfos and Rashi? Okay, anyone? There's a lot. I heard. Yeah, good. Cost versus size, right? That would be okay. That would be a good way of distinguishing. Any other thoughts?
Quantity versus quality.
Quantity versus quality. Okay, excellent. That according to Rashi, it's more about the quantity of it, whereas opposed to Tosfos, there's much more of a focus on the quality. Again, Rashi also focuses on the quality because the cost, presumably, it's not just spending more; it's more for greater quality. Okay, so I think both of them touch upon quality. Any other? No? Yeah.
Taking the negative side, neither of them focuses on like the work and effort required to use either approach, or if it was something you were constructing yourself.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to come back to that because I'm not sure if I fully agree. It's an important point, meaning there's a question of effort, the process leading to the mitzvah, and there's the mitzvah itself. So let's come back to that. Let's go. I had one example over here, which I think just brings out the difference between Rashi and Tosfos. And then we'll come back to the question I just asked. Right. So the example that I wrote out, you're shopping for an esrog, right? And you have 3 tables, right? And this is your typical thing. You go to. Do they sell esrogim here? Okay. Do they pick or you all choose it for them before? Everything's kosher, and then there's levels. Okay. So you have the olive table, the olive table, and the triple olive table, right? Fantastic. Of course, I don't doubt it. Only do olive in suburban. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so there's the olive table, right? And again, the olive table in suburban certainly is kosher 100%. It is bigger than an Egos, and it is kosher 100%, right? And then you have the olive table, let's say for another $30, let's say. And then you have the triple olive table, which is for $60 than the lowest table, right? So Rashi and Tosfos, which one would you have to buy according to either of them? Hidur Mitzvah, right? You read Rashi, you read Tosfos. Which one, if you want to fulfill Hidur Mitzvah, which esrog are you obligated to buy? Table Aleph, okay? Oh, it's kosher. Again, it's not just an egos, it's kosher. It's 100% kosher. It's bigger than an egos. It's kosher. And then you have Aleph, Aleph, and then you have the triple Aleph table. According to Rashi, according to Tosfos. Don't be shy. Yes?
For Rashi, it would seem like you would at least have to do Aleph, Aleph. And then Tosfos, it seems like Aleph is probably actually okay because he bases off the minimum shear. So therefore, it's probably, and we don't have that anymore. Basically, if we don't have the minimum shear, you're fine at.
I would agree. So do you agree with Zach? Right? Zach is pointing out that what we have over here is that according to Tosfos, granted, I don't need to have the smaller one in front of me, as long as I know that the Aleph esrog is already a third larger than the minimum shear of an esrog. Then I could buy it. Whereas according to Rashi's approach, every time I have a couple of choices in front of me, what I have to do is not look at the cheapest choice. I have to spend up to a third more for the next one. So according to Tosfos, you'd be allowed to buy, it'd be already Hidur Mitzvah, to buy esrog from box Aleph, from the lowest, cheapest ones. Again, because it is definitely bigger than an egos, and it's for sure a third more kosher, right? And according to Rashi, you'd have to buy from the Aleph table. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yes?
According to us, is there a hitter or a bigger one? In other words, is he saying specifically has to be minimum and then 1/3, or it's a little bigger, a little third bigger, it's also...
So it's not so clear. The way the Mishnah Brura explains, for simplicity's sake, I'd say, there's a question about, is this whole Hidur Mitzvah discussion about Lulav and Esrogim only, but most poskim understand it's about everything. It could be Tosfos just talking about literally size, and the concern is actually shrinkage of the esrog, okay? But most understand that no, it's more of the qualitative grandeur of the esrog, making it a third both larger, slightly more muhudar, more beautiful, and it's not necessarily just about the size per se. Yeah.
Looking at what I just saw, though, I would contradict myself also a little bit because it says, Tosfos does say you should eat Motzen. So he says if you can find it. So that seems to imply that you have to actually be able to find the minimum in order to
Could be.
apply the third element.
Could be, or he's giving a storyline. I'm not sure. Okay, but let's go conceptually, the difference between Rashi and Tosfos. Okay, so now we understand the practical difference, but conceptually, in terms of understanding what exactly is Hidur Mitzvah, right? According to Tosfos, it seems like it's more about the end result. The end result is that my esrog should be a more beautiful esrog. It shouldn't be the bare bones esrog, right? According to Tosfos, I have to make sure that my esrog looks nicer than what would otherwise be the cheapest thing possible. According to Rashi, I wonder, remind me your name? Sorry, you mentioned a comment before.
Me?
Yes, you. Chuck, thank you, Chuck. Okay, so Chuck mentioned earlier, this question of, are they focusing on the process leading up to it? I think with Rashi, there are those who argue, which I hear, that it's more about what I'm doing going into the mitzvah. It's almost like the process leading up to the mitzvah, the effort that I put into the mitzvah, less so about the result of the mitzvah. In other words, at the end of the day, according to Rashi, I could have two beautiful Sifrei Torah, but I always have to go ahead and invest more into the process of getting the nicer esrog. So one does seem to focus on, I'm not sure if this we were touching on before, Chuck, but the focus on more about the efforts leading into the mitzvah. How much do I have to invest into it, both financially, perhaps emotionally, effort, etc. Whereas for Tosfos, it's more about the final product. Does it look more beautiful than another esrog, which would not be as beautiful? That's the way I would conceptualize. One is focused more on the process, and one is focused more on the product itself. Yes?
Yeah, the beauty, okay, you get the seller sets the price. The seller wants to make money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but beauty is based on the person's, wouldn't it be based on
Somewhat
what
subjective.
they find beautiful?
Somewhat subjective.
Maybe they find the cheaper esrog more beautiful.
Right.
Because the seller, he may have arbitrary, he's just charging more, he wants to make more money. And the same thing, you have a bigger esrog, it's a third size bigger, but maybe it's uglier to you, and you like the other one that's smaller, it has litot, or it doesn't have has a pitum, doesn't have a, whatever, it's.
Right.
So it should be based on the
on the purchaser, or should it be based on the?
It's a great question. It's a great question, right? Money is not everything, right? Sometimes the price doesn't necessarily reflect the beauty, and there might be an intrinsic beauty, or it could be mispriced even. But yeah, it's a fair question. I don't know. It's a great question. I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything in the postscript about the subjective relationship to the item, but it's a very fair point. Yeah, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as they say, right? Okay, so let's move on to a little bit of one other question, which underlays some of this discussion. If you recall in the Gemara that discussed Hidur Mitzvah, it had a question about a third. Okay, it said, do anyone remember the question the Gemara asked? The Gemara said, when it said a third of the mitzvah, the Gemara followed up with a question.
You think 3/3. You do it 3 times, you're out of money.
Well, right, that was the initial question. Good, that was the first question. Excellent, that was the first question. The Gemara said a third of all your belongings. So that's when the Gemara had to say no. It's a third of for Hidur Mitzvah. Good, and then the Gemara followed it up. I heard someone say milagavu milabar. Right, that basically, shkach. So basically, there's 2 ways to calculate a third. Okay, there is what we say a third. If it's a third of six, it would be 2. And then there's the way that Chazal, at least, or not Chazal, but in Babylon, in Bavel, when you said a third, it could have meant also that you would add 3 to 6. Basically, you would divide 6 into 2 and then add a third part. Okay, so obviously that's the doing a third from the outside as opposed to a third from the inside. And the Gemara concludes, what did the Gemara conclude about this question? Right, Silber, I've never met a group of people who did Daf Yomi remembers anything. This is unbelievable.
This is an approximation. Perturbation to the math.
Okay.
Closer and closer to it. You don't give 3. You give it's a third of what's left.
Right.
That leaves over something at the end.
Right. Okay, excellent, right? Excellent. So basically, but one is a more machmir approach, one is a more stringent approach, one is a more lenient approach. The Gemara concluded, Teku, we don't know, okay? I'm going to start testing him on the Shakavatari over here. This is unbelievable. I'm so impressed. Okay, so how do we paskin? At the end of the day, how do we rule? Do we rule the more stringent way, that it's basically the third from the outside, which would have a higher amount, or do we rule the more lenient way? So says the Rush. The Rush is the one who gives the psak at the end of the Gemara, always found in so the Russian source number 5 says, Vad shlish milagav, he says we calculate a third from within. In other words, the way that you and I calculate a third of 6 is 2. Why? Since the question was not resolved. So let me ask you a question. According to the Rush, is the whole mitzvah of Hidur Mitzvah, is it rabbinic, is it d'Rabbanan, or is it d'Oraisa, is it biblical? What does it sound like? D'Oraisa? Why? But he's going l'kula over here. He's going the more kula. He's going the more milagav is the more lenient approach, right? So to your point, right? So you're right. So in other words, if it's more lenient, it would seem, right, we have a general rule. If we have a doubt about a d'oraisa case, a biblical case, we go stringently. If we have a doubt about a rabbinic case or something d'Rabbanan, l'kula, we go leniently. So it sounds like from the Rush that Hidur Mitzvah is a rabbinic mitzvah. It's worth noting, first of all, there are those who disagree. What's the pasuk? For those of you who saw it in the beginning, what's the pasuk that Hidur Mitzvah is learned from? Ezekiel Vanve, which is a d'oraisa. Anytime you have a pasuk, you have a question. Does it mean literally this is a mitzvah from the Torah, or is it what we call an asmachta, some form of tool, a hint, some connection, but not really biblical, not really d'oraisa?
Also, is the mitzvah independent, or is it only...
You're jumping ahead of us. Okay, good. We'll get there. Excellent. Yeah. So before we get there, with this question of d'oraisa d'Rabbanan, it sounds like the Rush is saying it's d'Rabbanan. It's worth noting the Stei Chemed argues and says, well, doesn't argue. He explains. He says, really, the mitzvah of Hidur Mitzvah is d'oraisa. He says it's d'oraisa, it's biblical, and he says, and the Rush holds to this too, which most of the poskim hold that we still go with the more lenient approach. How do you reconcile that? He suggests that the concept. What?
D'oraisa doesn't say what the amount is.
Excellent, right? There is a principle midoraisa. Excellent. There's a principle midoraisa. There's a Torah principle that says whenever you do a mitzvah, it has to be mehudar. It has to be beautified. It has to be made in a way that elevates it in some way. But it doesn't give us a geder. It doesn't give us a framework. It doesn't give us the parameters. Come along Chazal, come along the sages and say a third inside, a third outside. So the measurements, the particulars are midirabanan. Those are rabbinic. And that's why the Rush is able to rule more leniently, because the parameters to begin with are only rabbinic. The general principle of adding to a mitzvah, though, they argue, is indeed d'oraisa. Okay? So again, practically this doesn't play out too much of a practical difference, but at least in terms of our understanding, our appreciation for Hidur Mitzvah. How often do we think of Hidur Mitzvah? Not so often. We'll see whether we'll come back to that, but it's an important thing. I mean, not chas v'shalom to say if it's d'Rabbanan, it wasn't, but according to many, it's d'oraisa. This is a biblical mitzvah to ensure that we're beautifying the mitzvos, and something we have to think about when we are performing the many mitzvos that we do every day. Okay, so let's go a little bit further. I want to touch upon what Eli just touched upon here. There is a question. There is a very famous question asked by the Brisker Rav. The following scenario. Let's say you somehow found yourself a lulav and esrog that was just barely kosher. You did not buy it in Suburban Orthodox. You bought it in, no, just kidding. Okay, but bottom line is you bought a cheap, just barely kosher lulav and esrog. You fulfill the mitzvah, okay? Chol Hamoed morning, you shook the lulav and esrog, you got the mitzvah, okay? And then on your walk home, you bump into someone with a beautiful lulav and esrog. And they say, hey, did you shake today? They say, I did shake. But that is a fine-looking lulav and esrog, right? Should you or should you not shake the lulav and esrog at that point? Okay? Thoughts and explanations. What are your thoughts? No, why not? You already shook lulav and esrog. You're done. You check. You finished the mitzvah. Fantastic. Any counter arguments?
It depends. I mean, this depends on who the mitzvah is. Is it a separate mitzvah? Is it part of the originals?
Good. Good. So some suggest this might go back to Rashi and Tosfos. I'm not sold, but we'll come back. Maybe we could come back to that. But yes, what Moshe is pointing out is that is Hidur mitzvah an intrinsic part of the mitzvah you perform? Okay, I know it's Thanksgiving morning. We're going to get a little lumdish over here. Okay, yeah. So is Hidur mitzvah an intrinsic part of each mitzvah? It's a component of the mitzvah. So when I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of lulav and esrog, if I'm not putting Hidur there, there's no way of bringing Hidur to something that's already done. It has to work hand in hand with the mitzvah itself. That's one possible approach. Alternatively, Hidur mitzvah is independent. I fulfill a mitzvah, I shake lulav and esrog, but there's still something independent called Hidur mitzvah, and I could go ahead, even at a later point, even after fulfilling the mitzvah itself, I could go ahead and fulfill the mitzvah of Hidur mitzvah. Right? So let's think about the lulav and esrog case. So what would happen? If I believe it's an intrinsic part of it, then to your point made a second ago, you're absolutely right. Because I shook lulav and esrog, and I can't connect the hidur without the mitzvah. They go hand in hand. They're one and the same. And therefore, if I shook lulav and esrog, I fulfill my mitzvah. I see this mehudur one. Too bad. I'm done. Maybe I could do it tomorrow. But according to the second approach, which says it's independent, I could fulfill a mitzvah, check. And then, new question. Do I want to do Hidur mitzvah? I could do so even later. It's not an intrinsic, it's a separate, independent principle. And therefore, I could go ahead and shake lulav and esrog after, and I would still I won't get the mitzvah lulav and esrog, I already did that. But I'll get the new mitzvah called Hidur mitzvah. You with me? Yeah? Okay. Look, you probably wouldn't say a bracha. Yes?
Mm-hmm. So again, if the mitzvah, if once you're done, and picking up the lulav and esrog is halakhically inconsequential,
right.
then it's not really a din in hidur. It's a din on whether or not there's a mitzvah
right.
at all. If there is, I don't know.
Yeah. It's.
But if there is a key, like every time you pick up a lulav and esrog, there's something to this. The pashas have come across something nicer.
Right. So I guess it's a fair question. I don't know if there is a kiyum of some sort holding the lulav and esrog after you fulfill the mitzvah. Like by matzah. That was the example Rav gave. Right. The question is, can we find a mitzvah? I don't know what the mitzvah would be. That it certainly is one and done.
Tefillin would be a good example.
Tefillin, I certainly am getting the mitzvah each time I'm wearing it.
Right. So I'm saying, so you can make the argument that if I put on my tefillin and then you walk in with your beautiful, brand new, sparkling tefillin that have every single hidur and every single, maybe there is a concept like that. And I should
I would say for sure then, but then it's not because hidur is separate, it's because I'm getting a new mitzvah then. Meaning I would look for something the opposite.
No, why can't you say both? In other words, the reason why I have to go after hidur is because the mitzvah still exists.
Right, but so that 100%, meaning there, I would agree. For sure there, because it's a new mitzvah, meaning every moment I'm putting on tefillin, every time I'm putting on tefillin, for sure to be hidur. Is there a mitzvah, and I can't think, we'll have a great example in a moment. We're going to have a great example of a mitzvah where I fulfill the mitzvah. There is no concept of continuing to do the mitzvah, and yet there might still be a hidur. And that's...
There are people in Yisroel that will walk around holding the lulav and esrog all day.
All day, right. And I believe there's a rate about this. I don't remember offhand. Yeah, there is an example which we didn't bring down over here, which is about a bris. Okay, there is with the bris there is skin that is necessary to be cut in order to fulfill the mitzvah of bris milah, and then there's skin that's cut from zekeli vanveu as hidur. Okay, so this is actually one of the places that the Brisker Rav talks about regarding this discussion. There is discussion about when a person finishes. Let's say the mohel finishes the bris, and then they stop, and they're like, oh, there's still the extra skin that I could do over there. Do they go back or not? Right? So some say, for sure you go back. Yeah, go back and finish it. The Rambam, at least the way it's understood by the Kesef Mishnah and others, says, don't go back. Why would he say not to go back? How many bris do you get in a lifetime? That's a great example. That's one, right? Hopefully. You only get one bris, right? So basically you have one bris, and it's done. According to the Rambam, so what does the Rambam hold to this question, right? According to what I'm just saying, according to the bris, right? So the Rambam who says, when you finish the mitzvah, you put the knife down, you're like, I forgot the extra skin. So does the mole go back? The Rambam says, no. All the other poskim say 100%. 100% you go back, right? So what does this tell us? The Rambam holds about Hidur mitzvah, it's one and the same or it's separate? It's one and the same. And therefore when I finish the mitzvah, check, I can't do it again, and therefore there's no value of going back. People ask, why not? You should still go back. Maybe it'll be painful to the child. Whatever, you don't go back and do it. Whereas according to the most Rishonim, they say, no, go back. They hold Hidur mitzvah, there's the mitzvah bris milah, and then there's a separate mitzvah called Hidur mitzvah. Yes?
Does the Rambam say specifically why, though? Because it could be the Rambam saying not to go back because there's danger with bris. When you do the procedure, you've already been guilty of mitzvah, so...
Right, but if it's still part of the meaning, but it could be. I mean, I think that's underlying that there's some danger or it might be painful. But if it's still Hidur,
Rambam might say to go back. He doesn't give a reason here.
it could be. But keep in mind, I'm allowed to do the extra while I'm still doing the bris, right? So why would he just say if it's dangerous?
So this one's still the same cut at the beginning, and it's dangerous maybe to make a second cut.
I'd say different. It's not because it's the same cut. It's because it's the same mitzvah. I think is the way I would understand. I hear you. Let's see. I think there's another case. We'll bring this out even clearer.
Isn't there a whole separate concept by a lulav and esrog that you have to own the lulav and esrog? So if you see someone else's lulav and esrog, the Hidur mitzvah won't even apply to it
So,
because it's not yours.
Good. So I tried to deliver. I said it on Chol Hamoed because it's only on the first day they have to own it. There's still value in owning it, but in terms of the Iker Din, after the first day, it could be anyone's lulav and esrog. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So those two things I haven't fully understood, the inside and outside of the third.
Okay.
It feels to me like this question may relate to that.
There are many who do assume that it's the same question. The inside or outside, or the Rashi and Tosfos?
The inside and outside.
How so? How so?
Either you're enhancing a mitzvah you've already done, or you're adding.
So you're saying the third from the inside, or the third?
It's enhancing.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I see the parallel. Okay, I need to think about that. Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so let's see a very practical and relevant halacha, and that is the Rambam in Hilchos Chanukah. Okay, Chanukah is in a couple of days. Says the Rambam in source number 6, Kama neros hu madlik b'Chanukah. How many candles do you light in Chanukah? So says the Rambam, Mitzvasa shia kol bayis ubayis madlik ner echad. Every household needs to light one candle. Bein shayu anshe bayis merubin, whether there are many people in the household, bein shelo hayabo el adam echad, or if there's even one person. V'amehader es a mitzvah, and a person who does hidur mitzvah, madlik neros kiminyan anshe habayis. You light the amount of candles according to the people in the house. Ner lechol echad ve'echad, a candle for each person. Bein nashim, whether it is men or women, each person should have candles for them. V'amahader yoser alzeh, and you want to go super hidur. By the way, this is the only mitzvah I believe that we find super hidur, right? We have to wonder why specifically this mitzvah there's this double level of hidur, but okay. V'osa mitzvah min mufkar, you want to do the choicest, most ideal form of this mitzvah. Madlik l'chol echad, ner l'chol echad b'layla harishon, you light one on the first night, umosa v'holech b'chol layla v'layla ner echad, and each night you add candles. So the Rambam now spells this out in case it was confusing. Ketzad, the Rambam says, what does this look like? Harishahayu anshe abayis asar. Let's say there are 10 people in the house. B'layla harishon madlik asara neros. On night 1, you light 10 candles. Uvaleil sheni, night 2, esrim, you write 20, etc., etc. Each night you add candles for the amount of people in the house. Okay, so that's the Rambam explaining how we light candles, muhudar mina muhudar, on Chanukah. Okay, says the Ramah. Okay, the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, he brings down the minhag that is, I believe, the normative minhag for Ashkenazim. Says the Rambam, the Ramah, or Moshe Yisroelis, source number 7, v'yesh omrim dechol echad mibnei habayis yadlik. There are those who say that each person in the house should light candles. And he writes in parentheses, this is based on whom? The Rambam. He seems to be sourcing on the Rambam, v'chein minhag pashut, right? And this is the minhag, and he goes on to say, you have to keep them a little bit separate. You can't have them all smushed together because you can't see from the outside. Okay. Is the Ramah actually saying the same thing as the Rambam or not? No, why not? Excellent, right? The Rambam, if you read it critically, the Rambam said there should be a candle for each person in the house. So meaning the Baal Habayis, whoever it is that's lighting the candles, and let's say there are 10 people, Kenai Nahara, in that home. So the Baal Habayis on night number 1 lights 10 candles for the household. On night number 2, the Baal Habayis, the lighter, goes ahead and lights 20 candles. The Ramah said, V'yesh omrim dechol echad mibnei habayis yadlik. He says he's basing it on the Rambam, but he's tweaking it. Not that one person, the Baal Habayis, lights for all 10 people, but rather each of those 10 people lights their own lights. What's this based on? Says the Brisker Rav, this is exactly our entire discussion. The Rambam, as we just said a moment ago when it came to Hilchos Milah, what did he say? If you finish the Milah, you finish the mitzvah, you can't go back and do Hidur. If you're still doing the mitzvah, I could continue and do Hidur, right? But if I finish the mitzvah, I can't go back, I'm done. Hidur is one and the same. So says the Rambam, when it comes to Hidur of Hanukkah lighting, the Baal Habayis, the one who's lighting, makes the bracha, and they go ahead and they light all the candles, Mahudur. They go ahead and they all is part of that one mitzvah, part of that one action. They're lighting the 10 candles as an expression of Hidur mitzvah. The Ramah is clearly in the camp of all those other Rishonim, who says that no, it's 2 separate things. Just like with the bris milah, you could cut, and you could say, oh, I missed some skin. 10 minutes later, 2 days later, whatever, I go back and I cut the extra skin as a way of fulfilling Hidur, because Hidur doesn't have to go hand in hand at the same exact time. It's not intrinsically connected to the mitzvah. It could be 2 separate things. And therefore, our minhag, I believe this is a normative minhag, I believe most of us, many of us do, and that is that each person lights. Why? Once one person lights in your home, once you light in your home, the mitzvah is fulfilled. Okay? Someone comes home 10 minutes later, or even right after, yeah, they're lighting, and they're fulfilling Hidur mitzvah, which could be separate from the mitzvah itself, right? It's a beautiful approach from the Brisker Rav to explain how to conceptualize Hidur mitzvah. Is it one and the same, or is it 2 separate things? Okay, this is a little bit theoretical, a little bit conceptual, but it's worth thinking about when we think about Hidur mitzvah. Let's focus on the practical halacha, and let's try to wrap this up. Okay, so it says, let's focus on what do we do halacha l'maisa. If you look at source number 8, the Shulchan Aruch, and he's talking about the halachos of lulav and esrog, but you could just skim in source number 9. The Mishnah Berurah writes, this is true for all mitzvos. Although there are some who understand this halacha to be limited to an esrog, most understand Hidur mitzvah applies across the board to every single mitzvah we do. So what do we, remember we had a machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos about how we practically perform Hidur mitzvah. Let's see how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Source number 8. Imkana esrog. If a person purchases an esrog, shera'oi latzes bo b'tzimtzum, which you could fulfill the bare minimum. Kigon shukabeitza mitzum tzemes. It's like a small egg. Okay, how does that relate to a gnat? Whatever. The point is that it's the smallest possible shear, the smallest possible measurements. Va'achar kach matzah gadol mimenu. Then you go and you find an even bigger one. Mitzvah lahosif ad shlish milagav bidmei harishon. It is an obligation to add 1/3 of the costs in order to kidei lachlifo biyoser, not to buy the more beautiful esrog. Who does that go like? Rashi. Okay. No, Tosfos. Tosfos, right? This is Tosfos Pshat. Tosfos says you find one the bare minimum size, and then you find a slightly larger one. This is Tosfos' approach. Then he says, V'yesh misha omer, there are those who say, Shemotze shnei esrogim liknos. You find 2 esrogim. You walk into the store, you find 2 esrogim. V'achad hadr mechavero, and one is more beautiful than the other. They're both kosher. They're both super kosher, right? You went into the store in the most expensive esrog store, right? The deluxe store. You had the bad luck after learning the sugya of going into the deluxe esrog store. One is $100 and one is $130, right? So you are, according to the second approach, yikacha hadar. You'd be obligated to take the 131. Very important caveat. He says, if they're ripping you off, right? If they're basically upping the prices, right, then you don't have to do so. And if it's sorry, he doesn't say that. As long as it's not 1/3 more than the other one. The poskim do mention that people shouldn't take advantage of this, right? In other words, you can't go ahead and be a seller and say, wait, since everyone's obligated to do Hidur mitzvah, I'm going to ramp up my prices to rip everyone off. If you do that, we ignore you. Okay? So who does the Shulchan Aruch paskin like? Both. He paskins like both approaches. Okay. So first of all, one important caveat, and that is that the poskim all unanimously say that Hidur Mitzvah only applies if you could afford it. Okay? So if a person is unable to afford the extra third, you are not obligated in Hidur Mitzvah. Hidur Mitzvah is if you are able. But there's another question I have. I was hoping to speak this through with other poskim. You'll tell me what you think about this. But I wonder if nowadays, remember, let's go back to that case that I mentioned to you earlier. The case where you're shopping for estrogim, and you go to the store and there's 3 tables, right? And the first table already, the estrogim are more than a third larger than the smallest size, right? We said according to Tosfos, you'd be able to buy from table Aleph. According to Rashi, you have to buy from table Aleph, right? Now I wonder, nowadays in modern commerce, I'm sure we've all done this. You walk into a store, you see a price, so what do? I wonder how much Amazon charges for this, right? So there's no concept of something being in front of you, right? I think. In other words, nowadays, I wonder if even Tosfos would agree, I could theoretically get a lulav shipped in or esrog shipped in from somewhere else. I could go, there's like 7, I don't even know how many places sell lulav and esrogim in Baltimore, right? And so what does it mean in front of me? Back in the day, you had one, place, this is your lulav and esrogim, this is what's in front of you. Nowadays, with all those options, I think it's fairly common. You could always find the cheapest somewhere else, and the nafkamina really between them kind of falls away. Because I think according to both of them, you'd be able to find, according to Rashi, right? I'm focusing on Rashi. Rashi, who said you always have to buy the better one. The better than what? The better than this store that I walked into? But I know I could buy a much cheaper one at Amazon or whatever, in Lakewood or whatever, somewhere else, right? So do you really say that there are only the 2 in front of me? Or do I say the 2 in front of me is anyone who could ship to Baltimore, Maryland, right? So I'm not sure if there really, I wonder if even according to Rashi nowadays, there really is a concept, really a debate between Rashi and Tosfos. I think they would both agree you'd be allowed to buy Estrog Aleph, whether it's because it's a third larger than the smallest size, or because you could certainly find cheaper ones somewhere else. Thoughts? Maybe? Yes? I don't know. Yeah?
Yeah, unless according to Rashi, like in your choice in the moment, you should be expressing the thing.
Could be.
It doesn't matter what's happening.
Could be, but what's the moment? Meaning, if my moment incorporates...
Presented with the purchase of right? So meaning
Right.
In your purchase of the mitzvah, we want that distinction to be there.
Fair. It could be. Right. It could be that it's part of that process. It could be. It could very well be. Yeah. It could be, or Lefanav could be understood broadly. I'm not sure. I could hear it both ways, right? That's what Moshe's argument. Right? That's where I write that argument. Does it mean literally in front of me, or the concept is I have options, availability? I'm not sure. I could hear it either way. But I want to conclude with a thought or a couple of thoughts just about Hidur Mitzvah. I'm not sure practically in our day of abundance where we're not buying bare minimum things. All of our things are Mehudur. Let's go back to Rav Natzar Greenblatt, not just for love and Mitzrogim. Everything we have is just, everything is nice and everything is beautiful. And especially if there really isn't this debate between Rashi and Tosfos, if I'm correct, that even Rashi would agree that as long as you can find something cheaper anywhere, that it could come to you, then you could still fulfill the mitzvah of Hidur. So I wonder practically, in terms of the actual chiyuv, in terms of the obligation, I'm not sure if we're going to encounter scenarios where I'm absolutely obligated to go, I have to get number 2. But I believe, independent of that, I think there still is a lot about Hidur Mitzvah that is especially relevant to us. Right? If you go back to the original Gemara that I skipped, and that is, what did the Gemara say? The Gemara talked about, it said, Zeh Keli Vanveyu. Right? This is, you go back to source number 1 if you'd like. This is our God, and we will beautify him. So where's that said, by the way? Az Yashir, right? Jewish people are crossing the Yam Suf, and part of the Shira, part of the song, they say, this is my God, ve'anveyo, and I will beautify him. Right? The Gemara says, what does it mean, I will beautify God? Hisna'eh lefanav b'mitzvos. Beautify in front of him with mitzvos. Beautify yourself before him in mitzvos. Aseh lefanav sukkah. Make a beautiful sukkah. V'lulavna, v'shofarna, tzitzisna, sefer Torahna. Okay? Everything that you do, all the mitzvos you do should be beautiful. Should be beautiful. And the simple reader, we've been having a very technical conversation. How much to spend, how big. The original Gemara speaks a little bit more broadly about beauty. Sometimes in Judaism and Yiddishkeit, we sometimes have a bit of a negative sense. We think historically, how do we connect to beauty? Okay, maybe in the Mishkan, maybe in the Beis HaMikdash, but for 2,000 years, it seems like we don't focus so much on beauty. I mean, there's really a line of thinking that says that beauty is not something which is so relevant in our day-to-day religious experience. If you look at source number 10, sorry, jumping you back now, Rav Hirsch in Bereshis on the brachos that were given to Shem and Yafes, he writes, he says, the stem of Yafes reached its fullest blossoming in the Greeks, that of Shem in the Hebrews, Israel, who bore and bear the name of God through the world of nations. Yafes has ennobled the world aesthetically, Shem has enlightened it spiritually and morally. Right, there is this division, right? We're going to come to Hanukkah, and maybe we'll talk. Greeks are all about the externalities. It's about the physical beauty, and Judaism is about the inner beauty. There's this very clear dichotomy between the two. And that is certainly a valid approach in Jewish thought. But I don't think it's a universal approach in Jewish thought. Just as an amazing example, Rav Kook, who spoke a lot about beauty. Rav Kook has, if you have the time, you can look it up in the intermission of the football game. He has a quote. He says when he was in London, he used to go to the museum there, and he used to look at the Rembrandt pictures. And he spoke about the fact that he says, the Medrash says that God hid light. The light on the first day of creation, or the first days of creation, God took the light that He created and He hid it for the tzaddikim. He says Rembrandt got some of that light and put it in his pictures. Okay, that's like a little kfiradik, right? So some people would fall off their seats. Okay, it was me, Rabbi Silvernath. I said it. Okay, so but it's a pretty wild statement. Rav Kook was a poet, not just in terms of the words. He appreciated the aesthetic. Look at the source over here. This is in Olas Re'iyah. He writes literature, painting, sculpture, give material expression to all the spiritual concepts implanted in the depths of the human soul. And as long as even one single line hidden in the depth of the soul had not been given outward expression, it is the task of art to bring it out, right? He's speaking about physical beauty, right? Rav Kook clearly does not see that dichotomy between art on the one hand, physical externalities on the one hand, and spiritual on the other. He says, no, there are things that only art are able to bring out, right? If you ever listen to a beautiful niggin, what's that? That's art, ultimately, right? It's music, it's an expression of art, and you see a beautiful picture. Sometimes you feel humbled in front of this incredible masterpiece, right? That's a spiritual expression. Right? There isn't, sometimes people complain, I have a beautiful shul. Why do I need to have even a more beautiful shul? No, it's part of our spiritual, right? Silver did not ask me to say that. But let's go, guys. Let's make this happen, right? You need a more beautiful shul, right? It's not just parenthetical. It's an integral part of the religious experience. We are physical human beings. And art is a refined part of our soul. And it's only expressed, sometimes not everything could be expressed in a sugya of Gemara or even in tefillah. We need to activate and actualize every component of our neshama in order to be able to fully experience something. And therefore, there is this idea of a sukkah. It was asked earlier, an individual in the back asked, is there something subjective? The answer is absolutely. There's certainly a subjective, even if I fulfill bare bones the mitzvah of Hidur mitzvah technically, but there's certainly a question, there's certainly something which is relevant to each and every one of us. Is this beautiful? Or my tefillin beautiful? To me, is my tefillin something which lifts me up? And my tzitzit is beautiful? And my Shabbos beautiful? Is my Shabbos meal beautiful? Every part of our mitzvahs, the physical beauty is has to be that's an expression, again, maybe not the technical expression of Hidur mitzvah. You certainly fulfill Hidur mitzvah with whatever food you already bought for Shabbos, okay? But to go a little bit more and to think about how it's going to speak to me in the deepest of ways, that's a critical part of our spiritual experience, says Rav Kook, and an expression of Hidur mitzvah. One last point. I think I said that 3 times already. Okay, one last point, and then everyone, We pointed out earlier that the mitzvah of Hidur mitzvah is learned from Az Yashir, right? Why there? I don't know if it's a fair question. We could ask. We could have learned the mitzvah of Hidur mitzvah anywhere. I would have, if you would be left to our devices, I'd say the Mishkan maybe, right? That'd seem like a very relevant place. Why do we learn Hidur mitzvah from Az Yashir? So I heard a beautiful, beautiful pshat from Tzvi Cheshen. Don't know who he is, but a beautiful, beautiful approach. He says, what happened at Kriyas Yam Suf, the splitting of the sea? Hashem split the sea. Okay. But we know, according to Chazal, according to our sages, if you ever look at the pictures, maybe your child, or if you brought home, it's not just that the sea was split, right? Hashem, the Midrashim say there were miracle after miracle after miracle that took place there. Hashem made the land firm. Hashem went ahead and made individual walls in between each shevet, and then went ahead and had to make sure those walls were translucent, because no one should think that, heaven forbid, only Shevet Yehuda is going and not Shevet Shimon. You can see each other. And the Midrashim say that they were able to get the fruit and food and whatever from the walls, that somehow miraculously they were able to get all these extra things from the walls. All these miracle after miracle. So let me ask you a question. You've been enslaved in Egypt for 210 years, and you're going free. Your slave masters are about to drown. Could you care less about translucent walls? Could you care less about fruits? About the fact that the land is not muddy? If the sea split, dayenu, 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 right? You do not need anything else. And yet Hashem went ahead and He gave us so much more. He didn't just save us, He did it in the most beautiful, exquisite fashion. Says Rav Chesed, he says that's why we learn Hidur Mitzvah from there. The whole notion of Hidur Mitzvah is we're responding to God. God acts to us. He doesn't just give us, He gives us so much. The world we live in is exquisite. You know, there's a poem in Yiddish. I'll say it in English. Not because I'm being nice. I don't speak Yiddish. But it goes, basically the poem is about this shtetl in Eastern Europe where some guy was traveling and he comes back home with a little tangerine, a little orange, okay? And the whole community stops working that day. An orange, what do they eat? Breakfast, lunch, and supper, they eat potatoes. And this day he comes home with an orange. And they're all so excited. They come, and the first day, they literally just pass the orange hand to hand, and they look at the brilliant orange color, right? And they say, like, unbelievable, look at this thing, and it's shiny, and the different grooves, and it's beautiful, and it feels so nice. And they pass it person to person. And then the next day, the poem continues, they come back, and they all gather close, and they break open the peel of the orange, right? And they feel that little zest, right? You feel the little spritz. And they all take in the breath, and they all smell it, and then they break up the peel, and they give each person a tiny bit, and they all make their own little marmalade with the peel of the orange. Unbelievable. Day 3, they come back, and they're holding this orange now, and they all admire how this orange is pre-cut, right? They're able to open it up, but each person, there's a segment for each person. And then, because this, all these people, they break it up into tiny little parts, and each person is able to savor the sweet and the sour and the beautiful taste of the orange, right? I'll say, I don't know about you, when I eat an orange, I'm usually scrolling on my phone while I'm doing this one hand and trying to get the guck on my hands, right? But there's this notion of appreciating the details that Hashem gave us. And I wonder, if instead of an orange, I were to go to that shtetl and I would give him this thing, okay? It's not even the 15, it's like a 14 or 13 or something, right? Okay, and give them the phone. They would spend 2 years looking at this and saying, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And imagine I would go and I would tell them that, I don't know, there is a Eretz Yisrael right now, there are many, many Jews, almost all the Jews in the world live there. A majority of the Jews, more or less, live there. And not only that, it's run by Yidden. And not only that, but right now, yes, there are difficulties, but we have an army, we have Achdus like we've never had before. Their minds would explode. I mean, they would not be able to wrap their heads around this. The bracha that we have, the incredible gifts that we have. It's true. We may be able to fulfill the technical commandments of Hidur Mitzvah without thinking twice. But according to Rav Chesed's approach, that when we see Hashem not just give to us, but give to us beravchus, give to us in such a beautiful, giving, overabundant way, and we think about what we have in this day and age, technology, the natural world, where the Jewish people are at, there is such an achrayus, such a responsibility for us to respond in like, and to beautify our mitzvos to the best way possible, to say to Hashem, we see you. We see how much you're giving us, and we need to reciprocate. We need to we're not just doing the mitzvahs to be yotzei zayin, to check off a box. We want to do it just like you don't just give us life, you're giving us so much. We want and we need to respond in kind. Thank you for having me here. Such a schus. Really appreciate the opportunity.